Hey neighbor, welcome back to 7 on Sunday. Thanks for joining me for another episode. Hit the like button, subscribe, and all that good stuff to please the algorithm overlords, and let's get started. You know the age-old argument, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it fall, did it actually make a sound? I say hell yes it did. And on that note, we're here to talk about some forgotten debut albums that popped out of the womb to very little fanfare, washing away with the sands of time despite all of these bands later achieving a lot of fame. Many of the records I picked are long out of print, and even though some of them are available through, let's say, legal methods, I had to make one official rule: no certified albums. None of these debuts are certified silver, gold, or platinum in their original form.
And with the coming generation and the torn scene, this is what you call progress? I call it shame!
Dad, can we have Red Hot Chili Peppers? No, son, we have Red Hot Chili Peppers at home. Fungus Amongus serves as the unsavory start to Incubus's long-running career. It's not the worst thing ever, but for someone who tends to get really picky with funk metal, album 1 leaves a lot to be desired, especially when it comes to creativity. Brandon Boyd hadn't found his true voice yet, so much of the record sounds like him doing slightly off impressions of vocalists he looked up to, with that smashing rhythm section pulling the weight of 1,000 men to try and make Fungus more palatable. To be fair, the drum fills, the lightning fast bass aggression, it holds up, and good God do those bass lines make your head spin. Incubus were then scooped up by a label that saw past the tough exterior, focusing on the tracks from Fungus that relied more on melody in addition to the turntable spikes, funky guitars, and the other sounds that later made them recognizable to millions. Their sophomore album Science came out 2 years later in 1997 and opened the portal to mainstream success that the band rode high on for the next decade. Fungus Amongus remains unavailable for streaming, with the band themselves denouncing it as their worst album, a debut they'd rather you just forget, even if it does have a cult following. The English duo Eurythmics set sail to the stratosphere with their sophomore album Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, but many seem to forget their resilient debut In the Garden, which dropped 14 months prior to them becoming a household name in the UK. All but one of the 8 Eurythmics albums have been certified gold or better across the pond, so how is it that the origin story got left behind? Much of it could have to do with the slightly different sound presented compared to the synth pop they became known for. In the Garden paired up synths with the hypnotic post-punk grime, as seen on the excellent songs like Your Time Will Come and Revenge, all while never failing to keep the groove moving forward. Growing pains can be felt in certain corners, but never in an overtly distracting way. Dave Stewart and Annie Lennox had already played together in the Tourists, who were a new wave band from the 70s, so Eurythmics felt like a natural progression of their chemistry. Sticky percussion adds to the slightly eerie feeling in the air, a feeling that ebbs and flows naturally, given that easygoing cuts like English Summer eventually give way to the psychedelic whir of Caveman Head. Never Gonna Cry Again put a stamp on their legacy right out of the gate as the debut Eurythmics single. Annie's voice is just as legendary as that song's flute solo, and In the Garden stands up as a surprisingly cohesive burst of artistry that perfectly unearths their long-forgotten roots.
Are you leaving soon? I just need a little time.
Punk rock melted the faces of an entire generation as it dominated the 1990s, cementing Green Day as the poster boys for a movement they were, ironically enough, ostracized from due to them signing with a major label just before the release of their now diamond-certified album Dookie in 1994. Before all of that success, Sweet Children had just changed their name to Green Day, and the trio consisted of Billie Joe Armstrong, John Kiffmeyer, and Mike Dirnt. They entered the studio with producer Andy Ernst to try and capture the magic of their live shows on tape. The result was 39 Smooth, a punk record with enough hooks to sell you on Green Day's drug of choice, and to prove that you've got a tight half hour of music previewing what this band will be in the future. Green Day were signed to Lookout Records at the time, with this album selling a modest 3,000 units in its first year, which definitely isn't much, but interest in the album went way up in the form of 55,000 additional sales following the trio's popularity boom in 1994. The album was repackaged and compiled into 1,039 smoothed out slappy hours, which combined their early EPs, a new song, and also 39 Smooth, and that set sold well enough, but again, I have to remind you, this was all in the 90s. Modern day fans, even some of the younger ones, have discovered the likes of Dookie, Insomniac, and Nimrod, but often forget to turn over that final stone to see how it all began.
I float upon a river, a million miles from the plains.
Peter Gabriel Genesis supremacy goes far beyond what most would identify as classic Genesis. As they evolved as a band, they developed into a progressive rock sound that worked as a calling card in a sea of long passages. But what if I told you their psychedelic folk debut was just as good, if not better, than some of their chart toppers? From Genesis to Revelation was released all the way back in 1969. Brimming with lush piano chords, thoughtful musings, and unexpectedly grand horns, Gabriel elevated his gentle but persistent voice to match the almost innocent glow given on their first adventure. Traces of what they'd become are written into the DNA of From Genesis to Revelation, but at the same time, this is blissfully different, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a connecting love for the album. It's not what they're known for, but the strength of tracks like Serpents, In the Wilderness, and the triumphant sounding One Day make this a starter pack worth dusting off the shelf. Nothing wrong with a hearty helping of glam metal, even if the band themselves basically disowned an entire decade. We're talking 80s Pantera, a band on the run years before Cowboys From Hell transformed the unit into pioneers of the groove metal genre. Terry Glaze served as the frontman of the hair metal era, backed by the tough-as-nails Dimebag Darrell on guitars, Rex Brown on bass, and the late Vinnie Paul on drums. Metal Magic entered the world in 1983 to mostly negative reviews and very little commercial attention, often being dismissed as mediocre heavy nonsense, buoyed only by Dimebag Darrell's undeniable craftsmanship. If you only know the version of Pantera that had Phil Anselmo behind the mic, you might do a double take when you warp back in time to their debut. They're virtually unrecognizable with a much cleaner, stadium-ready brand of hard rock, but that does kind of make sense when you factor in that the band were literally still teenagers when this came out. You won't find Metal Magic on iTunes or Spotify or anything official since Pantera tried to erase the hair metal years from existence, but it's out there if you want to do a little bit of sleuthing to get a taste of a very different mixed drink that doesn't really go down smoothly, but it does leave a decent enough aftertaste for what it is.
C-I-I-O, then the heat disappears and a mirage fades away.
Prior to Robert Smith unwillingly becoming the king of gloomy, gothic rock, his angst-ridden voice powered a very different machine known as The Cure's 1979 debut, Three Imaginary Boys. Upon arrival, the record failed to connect in the way the label had hoped for, seeing that they had amassed a sizable following playing shows across the UK. What the label didn't understand is just how damn stupid they were to intervene in Smith's vision, as they forced him out of the equation so that they could pick what songs made the album, the order of the track list, and even the damn album art. The man himself vowed to never compromise again, and tends to shrug off the first LP when asked, even if critics generally did praise the album for its songwriting and production. Personally, this isn't really the style I love to hear from The Cure, since I'm more of a disintegration, pornography, Wish kind of guy, but a lot of my problems have more to do with label interference than anything the band laid down, since the track list does kind of feel ridiculously scattered. Three Imaginary Boys' more upbeat post-punk sound is gonna feel like a radical departure to anyone who's never heard the album but does know The Cure. Even records like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me have a deep-seated darkness to them, but this feels less like a haunted fog rolling in across the pond and more like a flurry of clouds on an otherwise sunny blue sky day. At number 1, I had to go with the album that gave me the idea for this episode years ago. It's the self-titled 1994 punk debut by future emo rock juggernauts Jimmy Eat World. This is another one of those discontinued, out-of-print records that slowly developed a loyal following as the band got more popular. The group shines here with raspier vocals from Jim Adkins, propelled to rollicking highs by his bandmates who sound killer in a gritty punk rock environment. Their late 90s output included some choice albums like Clarity and Got People Buzzing, before turning into a headlining act with the more pop-punk than emo Bleed American in 2001. Although that's a mere 7 years, the distance in sound could not be more light years away from what Jimmy Eat World became, so I guess I understand why they kind of distanced themselves from it. On its own, the self-titled Jimmy record deserves to be recognized for being a well-oiled punk affair with a glorious amount of hooks that sneak up on you the more you come back to it, which granted can be hard to do since it's not available anywhere other than YouTube. You might be surprised at how headbangingly catchy Patches gets, while deep cuts like Scientific showed off their love for long songs that later became a calling card for the band, as this one, Congratulations, Goodbye Sky Harbor, and 23 all follow a similar 6-minute plus Sonic Highway. I really appreciate you tuning into another episode of 7 on Sunday. If you haven't already and you enjoyed this video, then please do me a favor by hitting the like button and also by subscribing, turning on the notifications, and sharing out the video with a friend. If you want to check out more SOS, there's videos on screen now. You can follow me on Instagram at ARTVJohn, and I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.